we're being killed. We're being killed in every single generation of our peoplehood, both in Israel and in the diaspora. And that is our experience forever. And it's happening today as well in every generation of my family. Either relatives or friends of ours were killed for being Jewish. I was supposed to be living in this kind of golden era, certainly for diaspora Jewry, but also for global Jewry. One of my synagogues a few blocks from my house was shot up, and people that I know were also killed. So I was raised in a Holocaust survivor family, and a family who is always feeling threatened. My grandmother told my mother when she wanted to have more than 2 kids, no, you can't have more than 2 kids. You can only have 2, because when they come, you grab one and he grabs one and you run, and it's too hard if you have more. Right? What I believe is tearing American Jewry apart is that so many Jews have forgotten that they are part of an ancient people. And a place, and like, you're part of this amazing tribe, and you're just like, I'm not interested. I really believe in education. I couldn't have devoted my whole career to education, and so much of my mothering also to education, if I didn't believe that it matters. I do also believe that we do need to enforce laws that prohibit violence and hostile environments. And we're a country of law, and I think we need to uphold law. And I think a lot of what we have seen get out of control was the consequence of a failure to uphold the law. For every pro-Israel post on TikTok, there are 50 anti-Israel posts on TikTok. And even before October 7th, over 90% of first section New York Times articles that talked about Israel were critical of Israel. So like, so much anti-Semitic, anti-Israel information is being pushed out.
Welcome to Indoctrination, the podcast that exposes and opposes radical ideology in K-12 schools and academia. We examine the illiberal education loop that is teaching students what to think, not how to think. We speak with leaders across the country about the politicized ideology that fosters indoctrination masquerading as education. I'm Dr. Marcy Goldstein.
And I'm Dr. Brandy Shufutinsky, your hosts.
Join us and Americans nationwide. Welcome, Rona Kaufman. We are so happy to be having this long-awaited conversation with you about such important topics. I guess I wanted to just get started by asking what led you to become so active and caring in fighting the rise of anti-Semitism?
Thank you for inviting me, by the way. I'm really thrilled to be here. I adore you both. And so it's really exciting to be able to have a conversation about topics that are so important to me with you. So why am I doing this work? I'm deeply invested at a personal level. And I have so many answers to that question, but I think really what I'm so aware of, like inside of me, is the fact that in every generation of my family, either relatives or friends of ours were killed for being Jewish. And it's as far back as I know, right? So, I was supposed to be living in this kind of golden era for certainly for diaspora Jewry, but also for global Jewry. And, one of my synagogues a few blocks from my house was shot up, and people that I know, my friend's father was murdered, and my son had been going there every Wednesday morning, and the people that he had been davening with were also killed. And so, you know, in this in the most perfect moment, as far as I know of, in like my personal familial history of being Jewish, even now, we're under so much threat. And if I go back, I mean, my parents are Israeli, so they, lived through many wars in Israel, and terrorist attacks. And my grandparents are all Holocaust survivors, and so they were. 3 of them are really the only survivors of their families, and their communities and their friends and everything. And before them were the pogroms, and that's as far back as I know. Also because of displacement and oppression and persecution. So, if there's something that's present for me, and also present like in this intergenerational way, it is anti-Semitism. So I'm sad that my life has shifted in a way that I'm so focused on this, because I really thought that it wasn't going to be necessary.
Hearing you talk about the generational anti-Semitism that your family members have experienced, and I'm sure many other Jewish people can really relate to. What do you think is different, or do you think something's different this time with the type of anti-Semitism that we're seeing here in the U.S. specifically?
Um, I think I, I don't know that I think it's different. I think I had hoped, or I believed, like I've never understood my grandmother better than I do now, right? So she already passed away years ago. But growing up, it occurs to me, and I've thought a lot on this to try and really understand why something has moved inside of me and why my perspective on really the world and my place in the world has shifted so dramatically since October 7th. Especially because I felt like, oh, I was prepared for this. I was prepared for this. I was raised in a Holocaust survivor family, and a family who is always feeling threatened, and where my, grandfather would look both ways when he opened the door. And when my grandmother told my mother, when she wanted to have more than two kids, my grandmother told my mother, no, 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 you can't have more than two kids. You can only have two, because when they come, you grab one and he grabs one and you run, and it's too hard if you have more. Right. So like I felt ready for this. And yet I think I wasn't. And I really believe that when I would hear the stories and think about what it was like in Europe in the 1920s and the 1930s and leading up to the Holocaust, I really apparently believed that people were different back then, that like humans were different, that we were much more sophisticated now and more enlightened, that humans would not be vulnerable to lies being spread about the Jewish people. And I realize now that, the lies that were being spread then, whether it's like the really old blood libels of us killing Christian children and draining their blood to make matzah, or it's more recent ones in history, or it's kind of the Hitler-esque version of them about us being this kind of other race, and maybe even having some kind of like dark magic shapeshifters being like mice and rats and spreading disease. Those sounded so absurd to me when I was a kid. And I was like, no one would believe that, is what I guess I thought. No one today would believe that, except for here we are. And what I think of as the modern day blood libels today are that we are a, colonizer, um, with an apartheid state that commits ethnic cleansing and genocide, which are actually also absurd and ridiculous. Only, I thought people were smarter than they used to be. And of course they're not. We're in history. I thought we were post history. So I'm sad that I wish it was different in a better way.
I think you're part of a demographic shift. I'm in the same position. It's a very relatable story. Mine just is about my grandfather. Like, oh, grandpa, don't be silly. And wow, unfortunately, he's right. But I wonder what a difference might be. So, in bygone eras, they hated us for our beliefs. And then more recently, they hated us for our race, not being Aryan. And now they hate us for the land that we have decolonized, actually. So, how does that development in history, now that we have Israel back again as a sovereign state, how does that nuance the way that anti-Semitism is showing up now in this shape-shifting virus?
How does that nuance affect things? One of the differences that I see and that I understand as being different from anti-Semitism historically is that there's like now you supposedly, I don't think it's real and I don't think it'll last, but there's this differentiation between Israelis and Jews. And certainly not all Israelis are Jews. Nevertheless, this specific like differentiation is meant to differentiate between diaspora Jewry, the good Jews who aren't oppressing anyone, who haven't stolen anyone's land other than I guess Native Americans or other indigenous people in other places, but right, the good Jews and then the Israelis being the bad Jews. And I even see it as such a deep part of kind of our culture. And when I say our, I mean like American culture, I mean Jewish American culture as well. I think of how when the synagogue in Pittsburgh was shot up, there was no question that that was an anti-Semitic attack. No one questioned that for a moment. Certainly not anyone in my Jewish community. No one in Pittsburgh questioned it. No one in the United States of America. Like, we were so surrounded with love and support when a white supremacist came into a synagogue and killed people. And meanwhile, all the same people who recognized that attack for what it was, an act of Jewish hatred, anti Semitism, when they would look at attacks happening around the same time in Israel, they would distinguish those and say, oh no, those are not attacks. Those aren't anti Semitic attacks. Those are attacks on people for being Israeli. And for me, this was so especially bizarre because to the extent that, like, people shouldn't be killed, period, for, identity based reasons, of course. But if there is a place in the world that we have a right to be, it's actually not Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, but it is Jerusalem, right? And so this idea that, like, when we're being killed in Pittsburgh, that's because they hate Jews, but when we're being killed in Jerusalem, that's because what? Because we're Israeli? Like, this disconnect is really disturbing to me. It's nonsensical, I think, and I think it's so common and pervasive, really. Um, and the reason that Jews, Israelis, get killed for being in Israel is because they are Jewish, and that's it. It's just that simple. And I wish that we could, like, bridge that, and I wish it was clear to everyone.
I think there are two different things going on with that, like internal within like the Jewish American community and then the external within the non-Jewish American community. Internally, I wonder how much of it is a like self-preservation response that okay, if we're only good enough Jews, then we'll be deserving of sympathy or understanding. But that's like a kind of self-inflicted wound to try to distance Jewish peoplehood from where Jewish peoplehood originated, which is Israel. And then the external Jewish community too, where there's this we know this with other types of crimes, not just anti-Semitic crimes, where there is an element of like puritanical victim blaming. Well, they must have done something to deserve it. And it's easier, I think, to paint Jews in our homeland as having deserved it if you believe the anti-Semitic tropes about settler colonialism and apartheid and all the other like modern day blood libels against the Jewish people.
I completely agree with you. I think you're exactly right. I think especially with the self-preservation piece, yeah, it's naive, I think. I
Yeah.
wish that more American Jews would wake up and understand that our struggles are so deeply linked. Uh and that to separate themselves from Jews in Israel is a huge mistake.
What do you think that I don't know if it's just a block in understanding exactly that what you said, or what do you think that is? Is there just this movement, like a resurgence of the Bundist movement, that we should just be happy being stateless people under the boot of whoever's in charge?
I mean, I think it's lots of different things. I think people are motivated by different reasons. So I think some of that could be, yes, like, oh, I'm just American and I don't want to have to be, like, forced into being part of this Jewish people that separates me from my nationality as an American, or, for some other diaspora Jew, their nationality wherever they live. Um, and that we've seen throughout history, right? We saw that during the entire kind of, as the Zionist movement was growing, there were certainly Jews in Europe who were like, shh, don't tell anyone we're Jewish, we're trying to just, like, sneak in. No, we're German. No, we're Russian. No, we're whatever it is they wanted to be, until, of course, that just became so abundantly clear that it wasn't possible to just blend in. So I think that that is one of the motivations. I think sometimes you have Jews who don't feel particularly connected to their Jewish community, to their Jewish story. Maybe they felt somehow excluded from the Jewish community at some point in time, and they've been welcomed. They get to be the good Jew, and this is not unique to the Jewish community. I mean, I think about it oftentimes from a gendered perspective, right? They have a name for it now. I forget the name for it. The young people on Instagram or whatever, but, like, right, the girls who are like, oh no, I'm not like the other girls. I'm better than the other girls.
The pick
Like,
me's.
Yeah.
pick me, that's it, that's it. So, right, like, right, so I think they're pick me Jews, right? So I'm not like them. I really understand the pain and suffering of other groups of people, and I'm a true ally, and I'm all of these things, and I want to be in this other category of Jew. I think some of it is total ignorance, And I just came across that recently in an unfortunate conversation with someone who I otherwise really respect, a colleague, and where the conversation was basically, uh, I had the comment that was made to me was that what's happening in Israel is tearing American Jewry apart, or like
I've
what
heard that.
what Israel is doing is tearing American Jewry apart. And I was so horrified by this statement, and my response was, what Israel is doing is fighting an existential war on multiple fronts. Like the furthest thing from Israel's mind is anything other than surviving this crisis and this war right now. I said, what I believe is tearing American Jewry apart is that so many Jews have forgotten that they are part of an ancient people, and a place, and just really this beautiful history, something to be so proud of, the gifts that we've also bestowed upon Western civilization. And like, you're part of this amazing tribe, and you're just like, I'm not interested. And the answer that I received, which was the most shocking part of this conversation, was, I did not forget that which I never knew. And I was like, what? And she's like, I am not part of an ancient people. I am not connected to Israel. Israel is not my ancient homeland, and I don't understand. Like, I'm deeply confused about this. I mean, you do not need to actually know much about Judaism. I mean, almost every single one of our holidays, whether they're biblical or national in nature, like whether it's Hanukkah or whether it's Passover or whether it's even Tu B'Shvat, like they're all so deeply tied to the land. So, like, do you think that that's mythology? Anyway, I haven't continued the conversation, but that was shocking to me, and I think that that's common.
It's a lack of knowledge, like willful ignorance, I suppose. Just like she thinks maybe she popped up out of nowhere in the middle of Kansas or something.
Somebody once said to me about that also, like, we said, like, this is where we're from or something like, and the person said, not everyone is from somewhere.
Mm.
And we're like, what? Yeah,
I don't even know what that
actually,
means.
it's like, not everyone came from a mother. Yes, they did.
Mm.
Yes, they did. And everyone comes from a homeland as well. Anyway.
Mhm. So I know you're involved in a whole bunch of efforts to combat this problem, some of them being supplying people with knowledge so that they can act in in an empowered sort of way. So what do you think is most effective of what you're doing? Um, yeah.
What do I think? I have no idea what's the most effective. I know that, I'm like doing everything. All I do is say yes. Anything anyone suggests, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I bet you're in the same boat.
Yes.
um,
This
anything
is
I
why
can
we're
do,
all
I'm
here,
doing.
by the way.
That's why we're all here,
Yeah.
because we're like, yeah, great idea. Let's reach more people. I mean, at a core level, and I think this is also true for all three of us, I really believe in education. I really believe in education. I mean, I couldn't have devoted my whole career to education, and so much of my mothering also to education, if I didn't believe that it matters. So I think education's the most important, even though right now it doesn't feel like it's working, right? Like, we seem to be in a moment where it seems like facts don't matter, and we're hearing that again and again. um, and that's very, that's confusing to me. And so it's making it harder for me to understand what do I think is the most effective, because I've always believed it's education, right? Like, I don't want to give people sound bites. I don't want to trick people into believing what's true. I want to educate them. So I'm so committed to that. I'm committed to it with my own students. I'm committed to it to anyone else that I can reach, however I can reach them, friends, family, anyone who will talk to me, basically, or who will read what I'm writing, or conferences, all of that. I do also believe that we do need to enforce laws that prohibit um, violence, and that prohibit hostile environments. I do think that's important. I mean, we're a country of law, and I think we need to uphold law. And I think a lot of what we have seen get out of control, it was the consequence of a failure to uphold the law. Um, and so I would like to see more of that. And I think that that is another really important tool. Um, Yeah, I think what you're doing, I think what the organization that you work with is doing is so important, because at this point, we know that this isn't starting in college or law school. It's starting in kindergarten. And getting to kids at those young ages and preventing them from being brainwashed, I think, is really critical. I think we need a cultural sea change in the United States. Um, but I don't actually know what's the most effective. What do you think?
I think it's hard. I mean, that's a hard question to answer. It's a great question, Marcy, but it's a hard one to answer because I think, yeah, we're kind of in the same boat thinking, okay, we need education, we need education. But a question that has come up often for us in many conversations is, well, what do you do when the truth doesn't matter anymore? Because what do you, that education matters when the truth matters, but what happens when kids in kindergarten are being taught that, sure, we're a nation of laws, but those that should only be applied to protect a certain group of people deemed worthy, and every other person, whatever they have, whatever they experience is justified. And what happens when there's that cultural shift to where, yeah, the truth doesn't matter? Because if the truth doesn't matter, I don't know how much education matters.
Well, looking at that at a slightly different angle, I think you showing up as a model speaking truth is inspiring to people. Last time I looked at your video, that inspired me to no end, which is why I emailed you a minute later, and then you emailed me back, thankfully, a couple hours after that. Your message to your Jewish colleagues has 24,000 views, and it's only been up for a few months. And everybody I've shared it with loves you. And I know that people are moved to do more just by seeing you. So that's a separate effect of speaking up. It's dropping some knowledge out there. And for some people, it'll stick, and other people, it won't. But your courage, I know, is contagious.
Thank you. I mean, you know what? You're touching on a point which is something we clearly do need, right? Like, we are only as effective as many of us as there are, right? And so, and as we know, like, we're working in this space. We're like, don't you feel? I feel like I know all the people who are out there, like, it's a small group. And as it is, there aren't that many Jews in the world, and there aren't that many Jews in the United States of America. And so, like, not enough of us are being active. I just read about how for every one, for every pro-Israel post on TikTok, there are 50 anti-Israel posts on TikTok. And even before October 7th, 95 no, over 90% of first section New York Times articles that talked about Israel were critical of Israel. So, like, so much anti Semitic, anti Israel information is being pushed out. And I mean, just as far as the numbers go, there aren't enough of us, and we don't have enough allies out there speaking out for us, because we all know who all of them are too, right? Like, we know we know all the Douglas Murrays of the world who are out there, like, fighting the fight for us. Um, and we just don't have enough. And so that video I made out of total exasperation, and it wasn't like one of the planned videos in our video series, because almost all of them, I think all of them, other than that one, are substantive. Like, they're actually, talking about history or the current war or legal information or something. And that one is just like me begging for my colleagues to do something differently. And they've been quiet, but I will say that just this weekend, I'm on a listserv with 2,000 feminist law professors. It's the Women in Legal Education listserv of the American Association of Law Schools. I was a chair of this Women in Legal Education section probably 6 years ago or so. And it's a great section, and it's the largest section of the American Association of Law Schools, which is the organization that represents law professors. And since October 7th, and also before, but especially since October 7th, this email list has turned into a place to spew anti Semitic hate. And I can't, that's actually almost the only purpose it serves at this point, which
Oh.
is, led by one professor, but there are other professors as well, but certainly led by one professor. And in the beginning of the war, once I got the energy to respond, I responded for a while, and I received so much vitriol for responding, and so few other professors said anything. There was one in the beginning who also said, like, I agree with Rona, but everyone was silent. And I know there are plenty of women law professors who are Jewish and also just who have, compassion, I guess, for the Jewish experience. And then I just really stopped engaging most of the time with this listserv. And just this week, I'm sharing this story because I think there's like something has shifted, which is just this week. There was a conversation about deporting people from this country. And I mean, I believe it was totally misrepresented in terms of like not about deporting people who had engaged in illegal activity on college campuses, but rather it was like they were just deporting Muslims, which is not as I understand it to be. And then somebody responded to this with that famous quote from the Holocaust of first they came for the communists, then they came for the trade unionists, and then they came for the Jews, right? And I didn't speak up. And I responded with just two sentences of like, and yet still here we are, especially on this listserv, and no one speaks up for the Jews. And then I got a response, which was, are Jews being deported? That was the response that got sent out to the whole listserv. And I didn't respond to it. And I thought to myself, this goes back to the first question you asked, like, no, we're being killed. We're being killed in every single generation of our peoplehood, both in Israel and in the diaspora. And that is our experience forever. And it's happening today as well. And that's what no, we're not currently being deported. That's not the thing right now. But you know what? So what? um, but since then, few other professors responded, and that's new. And I've never seen them respond to anything on the listserv before. And suddenly there are two new professors who like sent like really substantive responses, like citing all of what is going on with Jews in America and in academia. And I just felt this like swell of hope. And so maybe, I mean, that's totally anecdotal, but maybe they're getting tired too and they're going to start speaking up more.
I'm sure there's a lot of closeted people. And the lack of functional dialogue with lots of different viewpoints being mentioned is proof that there's a problem. I mean, that's ridiculous that there's how many thousands of people in that group and there's not 30, 40, 50% who would share your viewpoint. So what else are you seeing in your field in law? How is Judaism, or excuse me, how is anti-Semitism manifesting?
Um, so in law specifically, can I talk more broadly about like just in
Sure.
general in universities? Yeah. So, okay, here's what I'll say about law. So we've never taught anti-Semitism in law schools, right? In undergrad levels, at least you have Jewish studies departments that have been teaching about the Holocaust or anti-Semitism or Jewish history. We don't have that in law schools. I think before October 7th, there were two law schools that were teaching anti-Semitism courses. And if it's not two, it's only a few more, which is really interesting because you have a ton of Jewish law professors, but we're all teaching classes like I'm teaching employment discrimination law, where I teach about the civil rights of all different groups of Americans, just generally not Jews, and where I teach gender in the law. And so it's not like we don't have courses in law schools. Like most law schools have, race in the law, and they have gender in the law, and they have different employment discrimination and civil rights classes. Um, but we haven't really been teaching specifically anything about anti-Semitism. And so right now there's a push to start teaching anti-Semitism in law school. So I'm giving you the solution rather than the problem right now, because I think one of the problems is that law students, just like other students, they just don't know anything about Jewish history. And I think it's really common that law students just think that Jews are pretty much only white, that they've always been privileged, that the Holocaust happened and that was really bad, but that's the only thing. And they have just like this really skewed understanding of what the Jewish people are and what we have been throughout history. So I think just bringing some of that education will hopefully, um, I don't know, hopefully educate people and prevent anti-Semitism at some level. As far as anti-Semitism in law schools, I mean, I think it's also what we're seeing across the campuses is also in law schools. Certainly, I'm really happy with where I am, where I'm not experiencing that personally at my law school, and I'm very thankful. But what I'm seeing on the listserv and, the BDS movement and trying to, um, ban Israeli institutions and academics. We're absolutely seeing that. I mean, some of the worst of the um, anti-Semitic professors out there are in law schools. So yeah, I'm seeing it. I'm hopeful that at least in the law schools, we're going to start bringing some anti-Semitism education. I'm working with the Holocaust Claims Conference, is supporting that to get anti-Semitism and Holocaust education into law schools. And I have a colleague, Rob Katz. He's at Indiana University, and he just completed a casebook, the first casebook on anti-Semitism and law. So we didn't even have a casebook on it. I'm on the steering committee of the annual Law versus Anti-Semitism conference. This will be our 4th year of that conference. It'll be in March at UCLA, which is really exciting that it's at UCLA, not a very friendly spot,
Hopefully they'll let you
but
walk to wherever your conference is being held, right?
hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully.
So when we talk about what we're seeing on campuses right now related to anti-Semitism, how it's manifesting is anti-Zionism. Is this attack on Israel, on Jewish identity, Jewish peoplehood, on Zionism as a principle of like Jewish sovereignty and the Jewish right to self-determination? And so that we keep hearing people say, well, anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism, and they're framing anti-Zionism as like being a critique of Israeli government or governmental policies. I just want to know what your thoughts are about that, whether you view anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism, and what you think, why you think that positioning seems to have been relatively successful in academia.
Yeah, I definitely believe that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I think the narrative is false. The narrative that is being, put out there and that people are believing that anti-Zionism is distinct from anti-Semitism, and I think it's like a lie, like not just like a, misleading kind of a thing that has kind of popped up. I think it's been intentional. It's been in the works, I think, for many, many, many years. I mean, in the 1970s is when the United Nations in the Conference on Racism, declared that Zionism is a form of racism. Um, and it's quite simply false. As you define Zionism, right? It's the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. It's the right of the Jewish people to have self-determination in our homeland. It's no different than many other national liberation movements, right? It's no different than what so many people are supporting in Ukraine. The idea that the Ukrainians should be able to be a free country to govern themselves, to not have to be under Russia. And so there's nothing about Zionism that is in any way different than any other national liberation movement. And yet, academics have been very successful in painting Zionism differently, maybe because it's a word and nobody knows what it means and it's weird sounding. And so, I mean, like I'm just dumbing it down for like, I don't know if that's the part of the issue. But this idea that Zionism somehow has any position on anyone else other than Jews is also absurd, right? Like Zionism doesn't say other people's national liberation struggles shouldn't be successful. It simply says that ours should be. Um, and Zionism goes a step further than many other liberation movements that I don't even think get to like number 2, number 3, number 4 in terms of like what their priorities are. But in terms of Zionism and how it has manifested and how it became a political movement, it was a very inclusive political movement, right? And we see that in Israel today with 2 million non Jews living there as full and equal citizens who have freedom of movement and freedom of religion, and where we have sex equality, where we have all of these kind of enlightened liberal values that we also see in the United States and in um, Europe. You know, it's even in its manifestation, it has proven to be a much more inclusive movement, which isn't necessarily true. I mean, if you look at all of the Muslim countries in the Middle East, if those are manifestations of some kind of national liberation, if they are manifestations of that. I mean, they aren't fair to other people. They don't treat minorities well. They don't treat women well. And so I think it's just anti-Semitic. I mean, even the question that you're asking about, like, how did this come about? Like, well, a bunch of anti-Semites decided, you know, that this is what we're going to push out into academia, and this is what we're going to push out into the world of international diplomacy. And they're lucky because they're doing it upon a foundation of anti-Semitism that has existed throughout history. So they're not starting at ground zero. They don't have to like invent anti-Semitism. It already exists. And this is really appealing to anti-Semites. Like, oh, yeah, this idea that the Jews should have their own place. No, 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 no. The Jews, this is white supremacy. Suddenly, the Jews wanting to be essentially free from white supremacy, but the Jews wanting to have, our own place, suddenly we're supremacists. You know, all the other people also want their own places. There are only those few countries like the American, like the amazing United States of America, or like Australia, these other countries where they're not really representative. They're not nation states, but I mean, that's what all of Europe are. The French live in France, the Germans live in Germany, the Italians live in Italy, like, and they've been there all along, and so too with us. So I mean, they've been very successful. I think it's total garbage. I think it's anti-intellectual. I think it's anti-enlightened. I think it's anti-human rights, and I think it's at its core, quite simply, like a vile modern day form of anti-Semitism.
I mean, I agree fully. I see it's just been interesting because the anti-Zionist anti-Semitism is so supremacist at its core, saying, no, you people, this minority people, you don't have the right to be emancipated and sovereign. You have to live under the boot and will of others. It's such a supremacist movement, and seeing it catch on in education spaces and academia, by people who are supposed to be smarter than that. Honestly, it's been fascinating, sad, disappointing, but fascinating to watch this supremacist movement kind of take root in academia.
I agree. I completely agree. Devastating.
Yeah, the double standards are like reality reversal is one way that I think about it.
I think we see the inversion like everywhere. I think there is a common thread in today's anti-Semitism. And that's distinct from some of the old anti-Semitism. But like there is a common thread, which is that they keep taking our history, our story, our truth, and flipping it. And then they also take all the terrible things that they want to do to us and say we're doing it to them, right? Like Hamas is so clearly a genocidal organization. All of these Islamist groups are genocidal in nature, and they're open about it and they're public about it. And then they take action to try and commit genocide. And it's not just against us, it's also against the Yazidis, it's also against different Christian groups. Um, and so they're doing it, and then what do they say? They say, "Oh, you're genocidal maniacs," and that's what they're projecting everything that they are. They say we are. Um, Apartheid also, same thing, right? Like we're actually talking about a region of the world where, at the very least, there's apartheid on the basis of sex in all of those countries. And then if you take it a step further, in many of those countries, there's apartheid on the basis of religion or ethnicity, where minority groups absolutely do not have the same rights as the majority Muslim group. And then they say that we're an apartheid state, and it's such a like it's crazy making, which I think is part of this strategy, and it makes it quite successful. I don't know why it makes it so appealing to Westerners, but it is very frustrating. And then as far as, again, the history, like when I saw pictures of Jesus was a Palestinian. When I see pictures, around Christmas, it's been happening for the last few years, of
Wow.
Jesus in a keffiyeh, and I think about that one, and I'm sure you've thought about that one too. I'm like, this is absurd. I mean, and this is something that everyone knows. Everyone knows Jesus was a Jew. He was a leader of Jewish people. And if anything, he would be wearing an IDF uniform and he would be fighting in Gaza right now. That's where he'd be. Um, but even that, this like flipping of reality, it's a fascinating form of lying that I don't know. It should make it more vulnerable, right? Like, shouldn't it make it
It should.
easier?
I mean, there's that whole every accusation's a confession, but it does. I mean, for the work that we do at Navi, one of the reasons why we're so invested in K through 12 education is if that lie keeps being taught to kids who otherwise won't know any better, our entire history is going to be erased. and replaced. I mean, it's a new, what's it, the great replacement theory. It's a different version of that, I think, where every from, I mean, the Jesus in a kafia was one. They're saying Moses was Palestinian. Like, what?
Yeah, nothing
Haven't
makes sense.
seen that? Have you seen that one?
I have not seen that's a brilliant point, the great replacement theory, that this is like another
Mm-hmm.
take on that. I haven't heard that. I don't know, that's a really great point. I think it's really important, and I think, we're actually also, you had asked also about the anti-Semitism and what we're seeing in law schools. I should note, I just finished a law review article that'll be published soon. And I've never written a law review article before that was intersecting with anti Semitism or Jewish history. So this is the first time I've written a law review article on that. And normally, when I write a law review article, many of my sources, other than primary sources, the secondary sources I use are other law review articles. And this was something that I did not have awareness on, was when I started doing research in the law review databases. I could not find anything about Jewish history, about our story. It's not recorded in this database. There's a lot on Holocaust and on Nuremberg trials, and there's a ton on Israel being, and the Jewish people being, colonizers who establish an apartheid state, who commit ethnic cleansing and genocide. That's all over the place, but there's nothing about our true history. And as I did a lot of research, unfortunately, so many of the sources that I cite in my article are Jewish press, basically. And it occurs to me, this is another mistake that we've made, and we've been making this mistake for a long time, where we've been publishing our history and our story and our experience in our own press, and not in, the world press. And our history is it's absolutely true that it's being, not only is it lied about, it is totally stolen. And suddenly there are claims that there's an ancient Palestinian people, which is just, it's just false. It's just not true. um, yeah.
Yeah, it is infuriating. It's cultural appropriation for other people, but not for us when we wear a keffiyeh or put it on Jesus.
It's interesting. I think one of the things we've seen, speaking of the falsehood of an ancient Palestinian people as like a distinct people, what we are seeing in curricula and K-12 curricula is this historic Palestine. That phrase is all over the place, like just a complete rewriting of facts, of historical facts.
So we need to start giving out those coins that say Palestine in Hebrew, or just copies of the Palestine Post, I think it was called, right before 1948, that talk about all the Jewish people in the land that were doing things. I mean, there's actual images that maybe we could circulate, just kind of going back to what can we do that will be more effective, visual sound bites of archaeological evidence.
I mean, Palestine was also always known as the home of the Jewish people. The whole time that it was called Palestine, it was known as the home of the Jewish people, even with the humiliation of that name being attached to that land. And Amos Oz, in I think in A Tale of Light and Darkness, in like the introduction, he talks about, and this is, his story. That book is his story about his mom and his life, and he talks about how, in Europe, all they said to the Jews was, go back to Palestine, go back to Palestine, right? Go back to Palestine. And then, of course, when he got to Palestine, the Arabs said, go back to Europe, go back to Europe. And this, I mean, and that, that encapsulates the so much of our pain and struggle and marginalization and displacement.
Mm.
We're not home in our home, and we're not home in another home.
Have you ever read that quote by Jean-Paul Sartre about anti-Semitism? He talks
I don't know
about,
which.
he talks about how they play with words, and words don't mean anything to them, but words mean something to you, meaning Jewish people. And so we're stuck in this space where some people will play with words and they'll do the reality reversals. And all the examples that you just mentioned that are so infuriating, because they actively don't care about history or facts and will pervert things to suit their agenda. And then the lack of knowledge that people have, they're like sieves, and then all this gets poured in, and they maybe don't realize the contradictions. I mean, they're so obvious to us, but in some cases, I think people just don't know. Sometimes the contradictions slap people in the face. It seems so obvious, and maybe they don't care. I don't know. Like, there's probably a combination, I guess.
He was so ahead of his time. I mean, this is something I learned just as an adult
I'll send you the quote when
woman.
we get off, by the way.
Yeah, I like this idea that, I'm so careful. And this is just like how I am as a person, not as a Jew, not as a speaker, but like I'm so careful with words. Words matter so much to me. Like I know exactly which words I regret having said to the people I love. Like I know which words because I'm so controlled and careful with my words. And it really took me into my 40s to realize that other people, words don't mean anything to them, and they'll say anything, and that there's not really, there could be intention behind it, like misleading intention, but in terms of like attaching some kind of honesty or authenticity to those words is not even like part of the way they even think about talking. And I projected, I assume that like I really care about words, I really care about truth. So when somebody tells me something, I assume that it's truthful, like that, until I have a reason to believe it's not. That's where I'm coming from. And it made me very vulnerable to, also, I mean, I should say, I was indoctrinated. I was indoctrinated. Like I am just, over the last decade, coming out of a very long indoctrination that I just wasn't aware of it at all. And I had a moment just last week. I was at the Hoover Center at Stanford University, and I had the great pleasure of hearing Natan Sharansky and Condoleezza Rice and a few others have this just amazing conversation. And I was watching Condoleezza Rice, who, by the way, hasn't aged in, I don't know, 30 years. Um, and the woman's brilliant. And I'm remembering how I felt about her when I was young and she was appointed Secretary of State in a Republican administration. And what a traitor I thought she was. I mean, the arrogance that I had, like, what a traitor I thought she was to her people for daring to be in a Republican administration. I'm so embarrassed of my young self for just swallowing what was fed to me without thinking about it critically and without pausing to even listen to what she had to say. I mean, that woman, every word out of her mouth was brilliant. And actually, her take right now on Putin, I mean, it's just everything, everything. And so I mean, I feel like I understand how easy it is to believe what is being taught. There's something somewhere that we crave, a story that we crave, probably about oppressors and oppressed, that we want it to be true. And so if somebody will give us that story, we like just
Hmm.
eat it up.
I mean, it comes from childhood, right? We have childhood stories where there's a villain and a hero,
Hmm.
and usually whoever tells the best story gets the most applause. And I think that for the most part here, in the US at least, the Jewish community here is relied on or thought that the world operates a little more rationally versus how emotionally it operates. And I think, unfortunately, we're learning a pretty hurtful, painful lesson right now. That isn't necessarily so.
Right, right.
Definitely feels very archetypal.
I want to ask real quickly before because I actually want to. There's a bit you mentioned it, Rona. The more people that are kind of speaking up a little bit more on even that listserv, that there seems to be a bit of a vibe shift. So do you feel like we're seeing a light at the end of a tunnel? Do you think this is just kind of the beginning and of maybe a little bit of a social shift where people are kind of tired of the disruptions and chaos in the street calling for, the genocide of Jews on campuses? What do you think? Like, what do you see?
I mean, Trump just won the election, not just, but right. Like, so that was unexpected by many. I think that what we are seeing in the United States is a frustration with far left ideology, which includes anti Semitism. So I think it's one in the list of many problems on the far left. And yeah, I think things that don't make, also things that don't make sense to people. When you have, I mean, I teach gender in the law, and and I, everyone should be treated as a human being, and everyone's human rights should be respected. And we should live in a society, in a world with kindness, and where we are inclusive, and where we value diversity, and all, and all of that stays true. Um, and yet at the same time, when what average Americans are seeing, or just regular, regular people are seeing, are like questioning of politicians, and they ask you like, what is a woman? What is a man? And they can't define it, right? Like the absurdity of that. uh, you know, people aren't that stupid. So, like, right, we've talked about how easy it is to trick people into this and that. And really, the reality is we have come to a place where, um, we live in a country with where many people believe that biology is irrelevant, that it means nothing, that it has no power, like something that is, everyone, that's personal to everyone, right? Like everyone lives in a body. Everyone has a physiology, and yet many people have been led to believe, to basically, like, what is it, like, to not to don't believe your lying eyes.
Yeah.
So, like, to not believe their own experience, to set aside what they know to be true and to accept an ideology. But for many people, I think they've woken up to this, like, wait a minute, like, I know something about this. I personally know something about this. And I think that there's a pushback on it. So I'm noting that, particular topic as being one that's, there's so much controversy around it, so much polarization around it. But I think we can attach that to so many topics. And and the far right has terrible ideas also. Like, the extremes are bad. What I think that we're seeing is people want some sanity. And yeah, and if you look at the far left, and you look at the protests on campus, and you look at these in campus, and you look at people being masked, and in a way that is intimidating, and where they are blocking people's movement, like, all you have to do is watch that and say, something's wrong. Like, this is not okay. This is not how I want to live. This is not what freedom looks like. This is not what democracy looks like. This is not, what education looks like. So I think what we're seeing, I hope what we're seeing, is a pushback against that. I mean, the fear is that we end up with these huge pendulum swings where we go from
Mhm.
one extreme to another extreme, which I think, I mean, I really want to prop up the center, like, I want the middle, the rational, the sane people to make it. And I want to live in a country where we also all recognize that, like, we live in, among the freest countries in the world. I tell my students year after year, I tell my students, and it's interesting because I didn't used to say it to them. And it's now, here I am, like, whatever, 15, 16 years into teaching graduate students, where they come in so often, so they feel so hopeless, so utterly hopeless about the prospects, their own prospects, and about the future, and about equality. And it's really interesting to me because I say to them, especially the women, you are the freest women in the history of the world. You are living in probably the freest country, in the freest moment in the history of the world to be a woman, and you're hopeless, and you can't see a way forward. You're thinking of not. Some of my students, after they're not, they might not have children. They might not have children because everything is so bad. And I like, I don't understand it, and I think a lot of Americans are no longer understanding it. So that's I don't know if that even answered the question. I'm sorry. I went off in this land of this other topic.
No, not at
Does your
all.
pushback a
No.
little bit shift them? Are they able to receive what you're saying, that they are actually living at a good time? It reminds me actually of Rabbi Wolpe's comment when we worry about our predicament, and he said, but there is an Israel. Or his grandfather responded, I think it says, "You're worried about Israel? How wonderful."
It's such a great quote. I love that quote.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to be at in a Zoom with Holocaust survivors later today, where, like, I feel almost I feel really humble, I guess, to be able to speak to a group of Holocaust survivors where I feel like, what could I possibly have? But I'm bringing them a message of hope, and I'm quoting Rabbi Wolpe on that because it's so powerful and so important. So my students, so if I catch them in a reactive moment, no, I think no one here heard me, but it's a theme that I push all the time, and it's not just for the women; it's also for the men in the class, it's for everyone in the class. And if they would just talk to their parents and talk to their grandparents, and I encourage them to do that as well, that would become more obvious to them. And if they would look at world history, if they haven't learned world history, if they would do some research on world history, I mean, it is clear that all of my students are probably the freest of any person from their ancestral line. And they feel so constrained, and they feel like, no, I'm not, it's this victim mentality that has taken over, and it's across the board. It doesn't matter what their identity, like, they all feel this and this weight, and it's so unfortunate because they're creating their own prisons, basically, which are probably more powerful even than if somebody else was trying to stop them from accomplishing something or achieving something. So what I have found over the last few years, when I've been trying to really push this message to them and like just awaken them to the fact that like they're so privileged, they have so much opportunity, especially the fact that they're in law school. I'm like, you've made it, this is it, you're here, you're in the top what percent of people in the world in terms of choices and opportunities and ability to support yourself financially, and the rights that you have and the way that you can speak out. And so when I'm just talking about it in classes where we're covering topics that are relevant, then I think they really do hear me. And I've had many students come back to me and say, I keep thinking about the fact that you said this, that like before you said this, I didn't realize it. Now, but when I had a class the day after the election, so Trump was elected, we had class the next day, and students were crying. This was my gender in the law class. It's a small, intimate setting, and we actually, I mean, we didn't even make it to any real class time because they were so upset. So when I brought it up then, I think no one heard me, honestly. I think like they were feeling super reactive, and I can appreciate that. There are times when I'm too reactive to hear anyone as well. Um, but I hope that it fell somewhere and, got filed away somewhere so that later they can be like, well, maybe I can have kids. Maybe America is not the worst place in the world, the biggest terrorist in the world as they're being taught. Maybe that's not true. Maybe I can have kids here. If you can't have kids, where can you have kids?
Well, I guess it's great to end on a note of hope and inspiration. I think your students are so lucky to have you, and I resonated with so much of what you said. I stand in front of students and I actively say the last thing I would ever want to do is indoctrinate you. So I'm going to give you a whole bunch of different viewpoints, and I hope that you'll go home and wrestle with it. I think there's few people who do that, but I do think of that quote from the Talmud: if you save one life, it's as if you've saved the whole world. And if you as an individual get up and you say something meaningful, and I do too, I know that it impacts other people, and a few other people will stand up eventually. It might not be immediate. I've been closeted about so much of this until recently, and obviously now I'm sitting here on a podcast talking about things. So
Great.
that phase of my life is over, which I'm so relieved about, and it's wonderful, and I know that people will listen to this and be moved to speak out more. So thank you so much for all
Thank
you're
you.
doing and for speaking with us. And we should arrange a Zoom just to chat when we're not even recording. So thank
I
you.
would actually love that.
Yeah,
I would love that.
let's do
And
it.
yeah, thank you very much. And
Yes.
it's been a pleasure. And thank you for doing this and for having this podcast and for all the work at Navi. And yeah, I'm really excited about all the work you guys are doing.
Thank you for watching. If you would like to support our work, subscribe to YouTube and follow us on our socials. The links are in the description.